All right, welcome back. Our next presenter is Dennis, and he's from the Ukraine. He's worked in various roles in agribusiness, including senior economist, head of agribusiness at one of the largest Ukrainian commercial banks, senior project manager for Polish investment company, and a current managing director and co-owner of IBD Agro. He's going to discuss and share with us some stories and how the Ukrainian farmers have been managing throughout this Russian invasion.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to speak at your conference. My name is Denis Sergiienko. I'm a farmer from western part of Ukraine, and I was invited to speak on running farming during the wartime. Actually, I asked organizers what area should I cover, and they said just tell us and share the experience of how to cope with farming during the war. So this presentation will be devoted to Ukrainian farming at wartime and how basically we managed to survive in these conditions. Okay, so let's start. Before we go to farming, I would like to say a couple of words about my country. Ukraine is a relatively large, independent, and democratic state in the geographical center of Europe, occupying more than 600,000 square kilometers of area and with a population of 40 million people. Ukraine's GDP is $181 billion, ranking 55th globally. Due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the country's economy could shrink up to 35% according to the IMF. In 2021, Ukraine's agricultural sector generated approximately 10.7% of GDP. Agricultural products are Ukraine's most important exports. In 2021, they totaled 27.8 billion US dollars, accounting for 41% of the country's 68 billion US dollars in overall exports. Crop farming accounts for 73% of agricultural output. Agriculture provides employment for 14% of Ukraine's population. So needless to say that the agricultural sector accounts for really important and playing critical role in Ukraine's economy. In terms of global production, Ukraine is ranked first in sunflower seeds, sixth in corn and barley, seventh in rapeseed, and ninth in wheat and soybeans. This map depicts the geographical distribution of major crops grown in Ukraine. Out of almost 32 million hectares, cereals normally account for 1/3 of total acreage and are grown mainly in the southern and eastern regions, as well as in the western part of Ukraine. Sunflowers are mostly grown in the southern and eastern part too. You can see the typical sunflower belt in Ukraine. While corn is raised in the central and western part of Ukraine. Also, we have some acreage of rapeseeds, and rapeseeds are mostly grown in the northern and western part of Ukraine. This year, Ukraine was predicted to account for 19% of rapeseed in global exports, 18% of barley, 16% of corn, and 12% of wheat. But this forecast is not going to prove, unfortunately, because the war has come at the doorstep. After Russian troops started invasion of Ukrainian territories, 22% of cropland got occupied by Russians. On this map, you can see Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. Some portion of Lugansk and Donetsk region was also occupied in 2014-2015. And then immediately after the start of the war, Russian troops moved from Crimea to occupy Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Also, some portion of Sumy and Kharkiv region over there in the northeast were also occupied. Recently, because of successful counteroffensive of Ukrainian army, these territories were deoccupied. As a consequence, the Ukrainian seaports were blocked. The total capacity of Ukrainian seaports is estimated at 15 million tons. And certainly you understand that seaports are playing critical role in Ukrainian exports. And before the war, 80% of Ukrainian grain exports was sent through seaports. As a result, 20 million tons of grain from 2021 harvest was stuck at silos. No grain sales during the first 3 months of war, and certainly global food security was challenged. It was a really difficult time because I personally had a lot of grain at my storage, and I couldn't sell any at any price just because there were no safe routes how to sell this grain to export. And this picture with a lot of ships standing near the port is not just only for demonstration of how it looks, but actually that is how it was happening in the Black Sea in March. Another consequence was that farm gate grain prices fell 3-4 times amid the hike at world grain markets. Here you can see at the chart that the margin or difference between FOB price and CPT price increased several times. Normally before the war, the price margin was about 25-30 US dollars per metric ton, which was reflecting logistics cost and the profit margin of grain traders. But because of the risks and increased logistics price, this price margin increased to almost 150-200 US dollars per metric ton. The same is happening not just only with wheat, but with corn, with soybeans, with any crop that was normal or usual crop for exports. After 8 months of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the damage toll to Ukraine's agriculture reached 6.6 billion US dollars, or nearly 23% of its capital stock. The major categories are machinery, 44%, storage facilities, 16%, livestock, 6%, perennial crops, and inputs, and also stored products, 28%. Of course, these are just estimates, and obviously not everything can be accounted for. And I think that the real scale of damages incurred to Ukrainian agriculture is much bigger. Here is the map which shows regional distribution of damages to Ukraine agriculture. Naturally, the most of damages were incurred in southern and eastern regions of Ukraine, because these are the regions where the major battles were happening, and actually they are happening now in Lugansk and Donetsk region. And also a lot of damages were incurred in Kiev region, Chernihiv, and Sumy, because that was the northern direction of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Apart from military battles, we also have a constant shelling with Russian cruise missiles and artillery. So despite the fact that the military actions are no longer happening in northern part of Ukraine, but the energy infrastructure and also the cropland is suffering from continuous shelling by Russian missiles. Russia stole or destroyed 4 million tons of grain and oilseeds, valued at about 2.9 billion of US dollars in Ukrainian territories. Russian invaders used two key channels to steal Ukrainian grain. The first one was using grain trucks, and they were driving from Melitopol, from the southern part of Ukraine, to first to Crimea, then to Kerch, and then back to Russia. Another channel was over the sea from the port of Kerch, which is now unfortunately controlled by Russians, and then the grain was hauled by ships, by bulk carriers, mainly to Syria, to port of Latakia. This was possible to track because a lot of them had on board GPS, and this is how all these routes were established, were detected. As I said, machinery is one of the largest categories of damages to Ukrainian agriculture. The estimated 84,000 agricultural machinery and equipment units. Basically, it's 11% of available before the 24th of February. All of these machinery units are either totally or partially damaged. These are all real pictures. What is happening to machinery when it drives over the mines in the soil. A lot of tractor operators were either killed or they had very severe damages, and unfortunately this is happening now as well. Especially this is the case with recently deoccupied territories of Ukraine. Storage facilities have the second largest category with total estimated losses of 1.1 billion US dollars. In total, an estimated 9.4 million tons of storage capacity for agricultural products is either damaged or destroyed. Storage facilities and nearby buildings could serve as hiding spots for the military equipment and thus become the target for the artillery. Here you can see the damaged silos with grain, and here just the moment when the Russian missile hit the machinery yard of agricultural company. Livestock. And the estimated number of animals that died because of the Russian aggression is almost 400,000 beef families, accounting for more than 17% of all registered beef families in Ukraine. 95,000 heads of sheep and goats, 212,000 heads of cattle, more than 500,000 pigs, and almost 12 million heads of poultry. Before I became a farmer, I used to work for a large Ukrainian livestock consulting company, and I know real farmers and real cases when the farms were completely destroyed. When Russian soldiers were coming to a village, they tried to kill and destroy everything they could see with their own eyes. The major intention was not just to steal something, but mainly to destroy. And all these pictures are just showing what is happening to the farms when Russian soldiers come. I have to mention that thousands of acres of unharvested crop have been burned as a result of shelling with guided cruise missiles and all artillery. More than 14.3 thousand hectares of perennial crops in the affected areas are estimated to be destroyed. Again, these are not just illustrative photos, but this is actually what was happening in August this year. In this picture, you can see the hole from projectile, and what is happening is the fire that takes over complete field. More than 250,000 acres need to be demined. We already discussed this issue, and you certainly understand that farms that got deoccupied by Ukrainian army, they are still not able to run farming as they used to, because the soil, the fields are saturated with mines, with projectiles, and there are lots and lots of them. There are different estimates of how long it would take to demine the whole territory of Ukraine. Some estimates say that it would take at least 7 to 10 years to complete this mission. Damages, however, usually fall short of the economic losses. While damages reflect the destruction of tangible assets and inventories, the losses estimate the foregone revenue due to the lower quantities of goods produced and additional costs the producers bear because of the war. And total estimated war losses to Ukrainian agriculture are at least $35 billion US. And more than the half of this amount accounts to export disruption and depressed domestic prices. That's all. This is something that we already discussed. And then we got a severe decrease in crops production in 2022. First, because of occupied territories, and the secondly, because the rest of Ukraine was not able to farm in the normal way. The winter crops production decrease in 2023 is estimated at 9% of this amount. And of course, livestock production decrease. One of the Russian invasion consequences is a decrease in the farm gate prices for export-oriented commodities, wheat, corn, barley, and sunflower. The initial decrease in domestic prices was caused by the Russian naval forces blockade of Ukrainian ports. Naval blockade required rerouting the export supply lines from the maritime export to the export through railway, river ports, and trucks. It led to a substantial increase in shipment prices from approximately $30 a ton all the way up to 200 a ton, and a decrease in the demand for such commodities since the export capacity plummeted. If the average volume of monthly export fluctuated in a range of 5 to 7 million tons because of the Russian invasion, in the first months since the invasion, it fell by a factor of 5. Decreased demand and higher shipment costs led to the weighted average decrease in domestic prices by 34%. Since then, the grain deal with the United Nations and Turkey expanded the export capacity. But at the same time, Ukraine started the harvesting campaign, boosting the supply of agricultural commodities on the domestic market. Still, the export capacities remain lacking, and the shipment costs remain high. Coupled with the increased supply due to the new harvest, it keeps domestic prices for export-oriented commodities in a deep dive. Given the high uncertainty regarding the functioning of the grain corridor caused by the Russian groundless claims and Ukraine's inability to export from the ports that fall outside the grain deal, we assume that a substantial increase in domestic prices in the nearest term is unlikely. The domestic prices for export-oriented commodities in the middle of September were 61% lower than the pre-invasion prices. And certainly you can estimate how much Ukrainian farmers lost this season. The most significant drop in the estimated 2022 harvest is for the barley, approximately 39% fall, wheat 33% less, and sunflower 31% less, since a substantial share of these crops is produced in the areas directly affected by the war. Compared to the baseline scenario, a relatively less pronounced decrease in 2022 harvest is expected for corn. Some analysts say that it would be around 18%. This is mainly because the corn belt of Ukraine is located in the center of the country, above the occupied south and below the liberated north of Ukraine. However, the realized production losses for corn could be higher due to farmers' potential inability or unwillingness to collect the harvest and decisions to postpone the corn harvesting campaign deep into the next year. According to our estimates, the harvest for other annual crops in the 2022 calendar year is expected to be 17.4% lower. At this point, I can already say with a high degree of certainty that the war already severely affected the 2022 sowing campaign of winter crops. In estimating the war-induced production losses for the 2023 winter crops, I make a bold assumption that the production levels for winter crops will remain on par, the same yields and harvesting area as in the year's winter crops harvesting campaign. The production losses for the next year's harvest of the winter crops could be even higher due to the lower yields caused by the lower quality of planted seeds and less application of crop protection measures and fertilizers, and by a possible decrease in the sowing area. All driven by the farmers' lack of working capital as a result of depressed domestic prices for export-oriented commodities. Supply disruptions also led to an increase in agricultural input prices, in particular for the key ones, fertilizers and fuel. After accounting for lower fertilizer application due to lower sowing area caused by Russian occupation and lower sowing intensity in the active war zones, the increased fertilizer cost accrued to additional 400 US million in losses for Ukrainian farmers. The estimated increase of 39 US dollar cents per liter of diesel induced additional 500 million US dollars of losses for Ukrainian agricultural producers. In this picture, you can see the queues to the petrol stations that we had to stay just to buy 20 to 30 liters of diesel fuel. And of course, it was almost impossible to finish a planting campaign this year. Another issue which seriously affects Ukrainian agriculture now is are constant blackouts across the country. Military fails of Russia led to a political decision by Putin to attack the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. As most of you probably know, that Russia is constantly shelling power plants and power distribution grid lines across Ukraine. The aim is to switch the lights off across Ukraine. And on this NASA map, you can obviously see that Ukraine territory is absolutely black as compared to neighboring European countries. Naturally, we can't dry our corn because there is no power supply. So, as we discussed earlier, the most of the corn is still standing in the fields, unharvested, and I think it will remain unharvested until the springtime. This will seriously affect the quality of corn, of course, but there is nothing we can do with that, unfortunately. So, before we were discussing all the reality that Ukrainian farmers faced, and now probably you expect some ideas how to survive actually in these conditions. So what are the pillars of the survival strategy during the war? First of all, I have to mention that this strategy can be used only by farms that still operate outside the war zone. And those who are in the middle of the hellfire, there is no strategy how to survive. You just need to take weapons and guns and fight with the army. Or if you can't, then you have to leave everything that you used to farm before, and just to pray that this territory will be deoccupied. But once you get back to the farm, be prepared that you will see the complete devastation. Okay, so in my case, what I ruled out was that I should stay calm and do what I'm supposed to do as a farmer. I know it sounds very simple, but again, when the war happens, first of all, you should stay in line, stay in balance with your emotions, and remember that while you can still farm, you should farm. You should plant crops. You should apply fertilizers, pesticides, and do everything you can to make a good crop. Be ready to master new skills. In my case, 5 out of 6 of my tractor operators were immediately called to the army. And it meant that I should master new skills, and actually I became a tractor operator. I covered a lot of soil preparation in the spring, and then I switched to spraying and covered 95% of all sprayings which were needed at my fields. Then you should simplify the technology as much as possible because there won't be enough resources to do complicated things. Ensure you have enough stocks of farm inputs, mainly fuel, seeds, and basic herbicides. I was lucky that seeds and herbicides were purchased long before, so I had no issues with that. The fuel was a real nightmare, as I told you before, but still we managed to find the way how to fill the tanks of our tractors. You should be prepared to cut back fertilizer rates, especially nitrogen on nitrogen-hungry crops like corn. Definitely it's not the year when pushing yields is going to pay back. Be prepared to set back your peak P&K fertility plan for a year or two. Keep the phosphorus and potassium soil levels at medium or higher levels before. If possible, switch to shorter maturity varieties. Save on expensive varieties, they won't generate return on investment. Review the crop rotation plan. Less nitrogen-hungry crops like corn and canola, more acres to soybeans. Actually, that's what I'm going to do the next year. This year, I wasn't able to make any alterations to my crop plan because major inputs like seeds and pesticides, they were purchased long before. But for the next year, I am switching my focus to soybeans because it's a scavenger after corn. It doesn't need a lot of P&K. Well, it needs a lot of P&K, but it can scavenge some portion of it from the soil after corn. It doesn't need a lot of nitrogen, of applied nitrogen. And also, I hope that I would skip the drying cost of soybeans. Review the chemical program if possible. More emphasis on available herbicides with a broad range of weeds coverage. Just because you won't be able to do several passes to address specific issues. This recommendation actually falls in line with simplify the technology as much as possible. Power generator able to run a dryer is a must. Unfortunately, I don't have a power generator, and this is the real issue for me now because I'm not able to dry my corn. Be concerned about just covering costs, not about maximizing yield or profitability. Build a strong relationship with your banker well ahead of war. This was a very good thing to do before the war started, because a lot of Ukrainian banks they stopped financing of Ukrainian farms, and those farmers who didn't take care much about building strong relationship with banks, they suffered a lot because they couldn't find working capital to farm their fields. And finally, keep supporting the army and your former employees who fight now. They make your farming still possible. This is actually what I am doing now. Here you can see the farmer from UK, and this farmer, his name is Gary, and he sold me a pickup truck. Pickup trucks are really in great need for Ukrainian army because they haul weapons, they haul injured soldiers, evacuate them from the battlefield, and also this hardtop is removed from the bed, and there is automatic gun machine which is mounted on the top of this bed. Why pickup trucks? Because they are fast, they are mobile, and mobility is a great advantage at the front line. Because the squad can very quickly move from point to point, and this allows to make very quick and precise hits with guided missiles from this pickup truck. This is how it looks now, and in a couple of days I'm going to drive it to Luhansk and Donetsk region, where the fight is going on now. During my recent trip from UK to Ukraine, I was also able to find 2 diesel generators in Germany, and now they are already in the south, in the eastern part of Ukraine. This is a picture of my team and another pickup truck, which I also took from Germany. These are the photos that were taken during my recent trip to the east. Here on this picture you can see Javelin, the famous Javelin, which is absolutely greatest tool which helps to destroy Russian tanks and other heavy machinery. I had to go with my car, and we delivered a lot of parcels from relatives and from other people to help our soldiers to survive the war. Here is the photo of a diesel generator which I bought in Germany. This is my photo, just in case. And this is the most recent mission. This Ford Transit minivan it needs to be repaired, and my fellow soldier who is fighting in the northern part of Ukraine, he asked me to haul it from there to Rina, to my location, and it needs the engine to be repaired. So this is what we do as farmers. We raise crops and we try to help Ukrainian army to withstand the Russian aggression. I'm happy to answer your questions. I should say that I'm going to start the fundraising campaign for the next pickup truck to be purchased in the UK, and it will be delivered to my fellows who are fighting in the middle of hellfire. Just in case if you want to join this effort, here is my contact information. Thank you for standing with Ukraine and helping us to overcome Russian aggression. I promise that Ukraine will win The only question is how soon and what human losses will be. We all should join together to shorten both numbers as much as possible. Thank you once again. Slava Ukraini! Glory to Ukraine!
All right. Well, I think we've got enough people in the chat here to get rolling. So thank you, Dennis, so much for joining us, for getting the presentation pre-recorded. He's already mentioned that he's hoping that electricity will hold out, but he will join with his mobile phone if he does get disconnected. If you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand, ask the question yourself, turn the video on, introduce yourself. That would be great. If you are shy, again, you can type it into the chat and I'm happy to pose the question on your behalf. To start the discussion, I guess I'll ask a question. Dennis, so you know, with the challenges that you've seen in the past year, thanks for sharing all of the stories. They're incredibly powerful. How do you see 2023 shaping out? Are there new challenges that you are anticipating? Is there something different that might arise that you guys are aware of?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to your audience. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm very pleased to be with you tonight. As to the challenges, yes, we faced a number of them. This is unprecedented set of challenges, I would say, because we actually faced everything we could even imagine. And this is a situation of a perfect storm, I would say. Looking into 2023, I would say that the first challenge comes from the fact that Ukraine wasn't able to plant enough winter wheat and winter cereals in general. First, because of the shortage of supplies. Secondly, because the weather was not really cooperative this autumn. In my case, for example, I planted just only 60% of what was planned for the next year. And looking forward, definitely one of the biggest challenges would be the price and the shortage of fertilizers, especially nitrogen fertilizers. So I anticipate that the forthcoming yield 2023 would be at least 30 to 40% less than normalized yield if we speak about the average yield for the last 5 years. First, because of less fertilizers, and secondly, because the total acreage actually would be less too. And for Ukrainian farmers, this is a question of what crop rotation should be next year. The choice is not really big because basically we have the standards, I would say the standard set of crops which are mainly grown in Ukraine. Winter wheat, I already covered this issue. Then we have spring crops like corn, sunflowers, and soybeans. In case with corn, the acreage would be much less than normal, just because of nitrogen fertilizers again. Another issue is with sunflowers, because this year, actually a lot of sunflowers were planted, but the weather conditions for sunflowers were less than ideal. Just to give you a quick example, instead of 3 metric tons per hectare, this year I harvested just only 1.3. And the key reason for that was that we got a lot of rains. It started raining at the beginning of September, just at the period when sunflowers in my area got drying in the field. but instead of drying, they were almost wet, and the rains were continuing up to the middle of October. So we've got a lot of sclerotinia issue, a lot of rotting out in the field, and stalk lodging. So that was the reason why sunflowers did not perform really well, despite the fact that they were standing and looking great over the season. So having this issue with sunflowers, it means that you have to cut your sunflower acreages for the next year, just because rotation-wise. We've got a lot of sclerotinia, and now we actually have to decide what crop would be sclerotinia resistant for the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years after sunflowers. And again, we understand that the best choice after such problematic fields with sunflowers would be the corn. But corn requires a lot of nitrogen, and it is costly. It is short in supplies. Then what we should do next? Soybeans will not be happy after sunflowers because of volunteer sunflowers, a lot of them. And again, after sunflowers, we tried to plant as much wheat as possible, but again, because of rainy conditions and because of the fact that we were not able to cut sunflowers on time, so we had a delayed planting of winter wheat, which is obvious. So it's a kind of dilemma for the next year.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for Dennis? Anybody else?
Oh, I see George.
Perfect.
Dennis, thank you very much for your presentation. My heart goes out to you and your fellow countrymen as you have to deal with something in farming that never should have to be dealt with farming. But anyways, thank you again for your time. I guess first question, obviously you don't farm right in the war zone. So where approximately is your farm? Is one question based on where how far from the east are you?
My farm is located 800 kilometers away from the front line. So I'm happy to farm quite far away from the battleground.
Thank you for that. And you also mentioned that you lost 5 of your tractor drivers to the army obviously as drivers for them. Is that quite prevalent across all of your neighbors as well in most of Ukraine that you're losing a lot of labor to the army?
It's quite a common situation, right?
Yeah. And obviously you don't have that much labor laying around. So now you've mentioned you learned some new skills yourself. You did some tractor driving and spraying and everything else. But even at the same time, there's not enough hours in the day for you to take the place of 5 people. So what are the main things that you're cutting back on or not doing as far as labor goes?
We still try to cope with everything which is needed for running the farm. I'm happy that I don't have the livestock. Actually, I had the livestock business 2 years ago, and fortunately, I sold all the the bull calves, but it was done just economic-wise because it was not making any profit anymore. But I can imagine if I had this business now, then it would be a nightmare, completely nightmare. In terms of cutting field operations, first I realized that this season I had to cut additional nitrogen application, which we call side dressing for corn. First, it became obvious that the corn is not going to perform really well this season. And the next reason was we fall short of nitrogen supplies. And the third reason, we barely were short on human force to do that. This season I was doing all the herbicides and fungicides applications myself, and it was a nightmare too, because for my 2,600 acres, we normally hire additional operator, but this additional operator went to the army, and I had to do all the job myself. All herbicide applications were done at the very last moment, I would say. It means that, for example, I had dicamba and 2.4-D herbicides on stock, and we all know that we should finish such applications by V3 in corn. But I had to do it V3, V4, which was really late, and it was, you know, was like jumping in the last wagon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Dennis, one question from Claudette Lacombe. What type of support will Ukrainian farmers need to reverse all of the damage once this is over?
Well, I think that firstly we need to clarify, or let's say outline that the most of support is needed by the farmers who actually lost all their production assets in the eastern and southern part of Ukraine. Other farmers like me, we lost a lot too, but mostly it comes to the question of unrealized profits due to low prices, but we can live with that. But all the support that would be provided in the future, I think it should be guided to the farms in the east and to the south of Ukraine. I hope that after Ukraine wins, and I'm completely sure that it will happen, Ukrainian government would be able to provide long-term loans to farms in those damaged regions, just to restore what was completely destroyed. But at the same time, I understand that the total losses that Ukraine already incurred is so huge, and there won't be enough funds to provide any loans to any sector, because it's not just only about the farming, but it's about any sector of economics which is no longer existent. If we talk about, for example, chemical production, heavy machinery, which was mainly located in eastern part of Ukraine, it is completely destroyed. And we understand that any sector of economics will be able to go to government and ask for reconstruction. So unfortunately, those territories, those farming regions, and I should say that it was not covered in my presentation, but it's very important to say that eastern and southern part of Ukraine is dominated by a very rich black soil, which is called Chernozem. And it's a really fertile region. The only limiting factor which really limits the yields is only precipitation. So if they have enough precipitation, they can have very decent yields, even with modest nitrogen rates of fertilizer. So Now this land is completely devastated. There are lots of holes from projectiles in the land surface, and it will take many years just to demine those fields, because now they are completely they're not possible to farm at all. I just returned from my trip to Donbass, and I was driving by those fields, and it's completely unbelievable view, because you can see just only weeds standing waist high or even higher on those fields, and among those weeds you can see the shells from the projectiles standing right in the fields.
Oh, wow.
And we understand that this is like let's say Neverland for many years already.
Wow.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, our heart goes out to you and all your countrymen, obviously, for everything that you've had to go through this past, well, however many months it's been. I'm trying to think, 8 months, 10 months. So I will put up the QR code for anybody that's collecting their CCA credits, and I will backtrack to make sure that those that have missed some of their QR codes will get them. We want to recognize some of our 22 program partners, Real Estate Center, Kubota, and Down to Earth. We're going to wrap up this morning's sessions with this presentation and Q&A session. So thank you to all the speakers this morning, and in particular to Dennis for sharing your time and your experiences with us. It was very powerful, so we really appreciate it. We will break for lunch. Please meet back for the next presentation at 1 o'clock, and we'll hear from Dr. Fu, Dr. David Hughes on global egg policies. So thanks so much, everybody.